Hey, it's Alenka Quintrell, and I am going to have a look at an adrenal stress profile with you today. So I'm going to share a sample report so we can have a look at that together. So this is essentially what it would look like if you ordered the test. And it's a really, really lovely saliva cortisol test. So it's really easy to do from home. You will have to produce 4 saliva samples across the course of a day. And what it does is it measures the amount of cortisol that is within that saliva sample. So it's a fantastic insight into, your general routine, your pattern of cortisol, i.e. your response to stress throughout the course of a day, which tells us a lot of information. So it'll tell us first and foremost if you're even producing or secreting enough cortisol straight away. Which is really important. So cortisol obviously helps us with our get up and go. It makes us alert. It keeps us going, sort of a fight and flight response. It's a really important and necessary hormone. And on the flip side of that, obviously, we don't want to be having too much because that could put us into quite a wired state. But then also, we don't want to be having too little because then maybe we just are flatlining. We don't have any get up and go. Maybe we really struggle to get out of bed or struggle to just do most things. Maybe we're just not producing enough cortisol. So we can find all of those things out from this test, which is brilliant. And it's essentially looking at someone's adrenal function. So we can understand whether someone's amount of stress has been very chronic or it's just too intense, and maybe that's impacted perhaps their adrenal health. So it's plotted onto this 4-point graph here, and you can see the time frames to take the samples within listed. It's also then represented in this results table here, but generally you probably focus mainly on the graph. And an optimal zone to be in is the green section. So we're looking for a rhythm of cortisol or the pattern. And ideally it starts off quite high, and then declines and then slowly tapers off throughout the rest of the day. And that's where then melatonin, our sleepy hormone, would come in, and obviously, hopefully we have a good night's sleep. So generally that's the pattern we want to find. Anything in yellow is actually still pretty good. You're still within the reference range, but it's high or low within the reference range. So nicer sort of place to be to then put everything back into balance. And then anything in red, or in fact in the white section, high or low, very imbalanced, and we want to pull all of that back in, obviously, to optimal. And the best thing about this test is that we can be extremely personalized with when we put support in place. So for instance, you might start off with a really good amount or good surge of cortisol first thing in the morning. We jump out of bed, we all get up and go, which is great. But then maybe it just stays quite high. And then we understand, okay, we actually now need to manage, cortisol throughout the rest of the day. Or in fact, maybe we get a spike of cortisol in the evening, and actually we're not winding down in time for bed, and we really need to work on routine perhaps, and maybe some nice supplement support to calm the nervous system down. All of those sorts of things, we can then be very, very specific with when we put in our targeted support. On the flip side of that, we might actually have very, very low levels of cortisol, and perhaps we're looking at really nourishing those adrenal glands. This is probably more so a case of someone who has had, chronic levels of stress, extremely, extremely large amounts of, let's say, trauma. It could be as far as, really intense ongoing infections, just a really chronic state of constant high release of stress at some point. And maybe it's just become too much and their adrenal function has just sort of gone flat. We can also see those represented on this graph. And obviously that would literally represent quite a flat line. So that in itself will tell us a lot about your adrenal health. And then we can be, like I said, very targeted, whether we're looking to stimulate adrenal function, nourish our adrenal glands, maybe work on calming the nervous system, whatever it might be. We're able to find that out and then obviously be very personalized with that. It's also worth noting, lots of things can impact our stress response. So it might not just be environmental stress. It can absolutely be emotional. It could even be physical. So if we're exercising a lot, all of those things, we can then understand, our own unique response to stress, because that's completely individual. And a really, really key aspect of this test is represented here in this graph. And we also then measure another hormone, which is called DHEA, another key adrenal hormone. It's also made elsewhere, but it goes hand in hand with our adrenal function. And it's a key hormone that can also tell us about someone's perhaps chronic level of stress. So you'll often find if someone's had a lot of stress going on, their DHEA might also be impacted, and it will also be quite low. And that could be an issue in terms of supporting our sex hormones. So DHEA can also then go on to help us creating testosterone and also estrogen. So it's a really key test to consider if we are looking at someone's impact of stress on, let's say, their fertility, or even as far as things just like just general sort of bone health as well. Maybe we're going into sort of the menopause years, and we really want to understand, how our stress response is at that point, because our adrenals then will take over after menopause. So this is a really, really lovely test to consider doing for so many different reasons, especially when it comes to hormone health. I would also put in thyroid health as well. Our adrenals very much work closely with our thyroid, so these two would also go hand in hand if you were to do a thyroid test. So last but not least, I just want to touch on an add-on option, which is this cortisol awakening response, which in my opinion is really worth adding on. It's as simple as it's measuring someone's resiliency to stress. And how it does that is it measures 2 extra saliva samples and the difference between those. So as soon as someone opens their eyes in the morning, you'll take a sample here, and you'll wait 30 minutes and then take the second sample. And you're measuring the difference between the two. And ideally, you want it to increase by more than 50%. So for this person, they're literally spot on. They're at 85%. It's pretty much where you want to be. So that's great. And that would tell us that someone is responding to stress, which is also really important, because what we don't want is to not have that stress response, because that can obviously tell us that maybe someone's adrenal function is very, very, very depleted. And in fact, they might just really struggle to get out of bed in the morning, and every sort of action becomes quite a hardship. So, and maybe, that is because our adrenals literally cannot pump out the cortisol it needs. And we can find that out, which is amazing. So that in itself is the adrenal stress profile. And like I said, you can use this across so many different aspects. Of course, if you struggle with sleep in the evenings, or, maybe you're in fact napping during the day because you can't, you're struggling to regulate your circadian rhythm, this test would be a brilliant option just to see where you fit in, and how we can then obviously move forward with rebalancing everything. So that is what I'm going to leave you with for today, and I will speak to you again in the next one.